Good to be back, Mel. Thank you for your voice in this battle. It's been a long and arduous one, but we are definitely reaching critical mass now, forced to critical mass by recent events and not a moment too soon. And here's what we can say definitively is Helene was steered, period. Patented technologies of frequency transmission steered that storm. We recorded all of it. Encourage your listeners to go to geoengineeringwatch.org under the recent column and look at the 90-second update steering Hurricane Helene. So again, we can speculate on agendas and objectives, but the storm was steered, period. In regard to the state of the climate, what we would caution people to consider is that, yes, there are many disaster capitalists making money off what's occurring, climate engineering a part of that, everything from crop future derivatives to who knows how many people are cashing in on this, but that doesn't mean the damage isn't real. Not just from climate engineering. We've been really bad stewards of the planet. I think we all acknowledge that. But our position at geoengineeringwatch.org is how can we have any legitimate discussion about climate, anything from any perspective without addressing this first and foremost. So when you see all the tearful activists, AOC and the rest crying their eyes out on TV, not mentioning a word about the single most destructive human activity of all, climate intervention operations, AKA weather warfare, that's the epitome of either criminal ignorance or lying. Take your pick. And the same is true for the so-called meteorological community, all the environmental groups. And now we see, as of this morning on the New York Times, it appears that the population has had enough of being lied to. And their headline this morning that the population is pushing back, it seems, against the meteorological community. And we would encourage people to always be professional and peaceful. Send them a link to the dimming. CC as many other concerned individuals, citizens as you can, so that person you're emailing the dimming to, again, our groundbreaking documentary on climate engineering, so that they know many are listening into that conversation. That's how you can start a spot fire of awareness and put these people on notice, again, peacefully and professionally, that we know that they know what's occurring. And lying about that is not okay. We're talking about an existential threat here. What's happening in our atmosphere is destroying, more than any other single factor, the planet's remaining life support systems. The planet can't respond to the damage from other sources because it's in a virtual toxic climate engineering straitjacket. And the ship is going down, Mel, faster than almost any yet understand. The power structure is doing their best to feed normalcy bias, pumping the stock market up, pretending everything's going to work out just fine until the moment of impact. It is. And there is certainly no doubt the whole COVID-19 scenario involves intergovernmental cooperation, period. There's no legitimate denial of the fact that that was engineered in 2015. It was published in the journal Nature. They engineered the gain of function characteristics. So we had global cooperation in that arena between otherwise adversarial nations. We have surface tension, surface conflicts, but yet they're working together behind the curtain. Same is true with climate engineering. We have congressional documents going back even to the 70s, one in particular, 800 pages long, specifically outlining this kind of global cooperation between, quote, otherwise adversarial nations. Why? Those who run all these nations in one form or another are those who print the money, as you correctly stated. That's who is pulling the strings here. They control militaries, thus they control countries. They're not loyal to any nation. And they all know that given the damage done to the planet, and again, the damage is real. I want to assure people that I'm not an Al Gore fan or environmental groups, but the damage is real. We're through the guardrail, Thelma and Louise moment. We're sailing through the air and people are oblivious. They're fighting over what station to put the radio on, Mel.
I know it.
Football games and election theater that is designed to distract and divide populations. We're going to the bottom of the canyon. So at this point, again, with that intergovernmental cooperation, they all know, the leaders of these countries all know the planet and its damaged life support systems can no longer support 8 billion people. And that's a very difficult pill to swallow. And we certainly should blame those in power the most. They should be the first to walk the plank because they've done the most to make this happen. Right. But we've had so far a very complacent population that was all too happy to go to football games and watch election theater and ignore the oncoming train. And that needs to change. If we're to have any chance of salvaging what's left of the planet's life support systems and buying time, we need to change course completely. And that starts with stopping what's happening in our skies, which is not just damaging the planet's life support systems, Mel, it's damaging us.
Right.
We know these particles are highly toxic. We're talking about, from our rain test, working with University of Minnesota, hundreds of tests, and extrapolating the quantity of material globally over an annual basis. It appears somewhere in the range of 40 to 60 million tons of nanoparticles are being dispersed annually, all of which we get to breathe. Is it any wonder every other commercial is a pharmaceutical for COPD, asthma, allergy, this, or oxygen breathing? I mean, again, this is an all-out assault you can't hide from. It does, and yes, it has been. And I want to, again, be careful to point out that we have in so many ways laid waste to this planet. I mean, where would one start? But this intentional intervention, and there's nothing benevolent in these programs. I want to make that absolutely clear. And troublingly, we have not just matrix media pushing back and pretending this isn't happening. They have their online trolls as well, yes, pretending that this is just jet exhaust, nothing to see here, no intentional dispersions. We have up-close film footage, Mel, of these aircraft at altitude, nozzles visible, turning on and off. This isn't just jet exhaust. Use common sense. Use your God-given sense of reason. We beg people to do that. This is an all-out assault. So in regard to the planet's immune system, as you correctly stated, I would agree with you completely. And that is much bigger than what most people know. Are the methane blowouts, and I'm not talking about cow flatulence, Mel. You know, it's another issue they've used to divide populations. It's the cow flatulence. Cutting down forests to grow cows, that's a problem. Yeah. But the methane release is blowing out because it's thawing and expelling. If your listeners search Siberian methane craters, you have to see it to believe it. Looks like nuclear bomb craters in Siberian tundra. Is that part of the immune system? Is methane blowing into the atmosphere? Is that the planet trying to purge itself of the plague that humanity has been? Unfortunately, because of this current paradigm and climate engineering being at the epitome of that, yeah, the seafloor blowouts are far bigger still. Why is that a problem? Because this expelling methane, which you hear no matrix media source talking about, they want us to look at cow flatulence so they can divide populations and ignore the bigger problem. Right. Methane over a 10-year time horizon is 120 times more effective at trapping heat than CO2. Why aren't we told about this methane problem? It's covering the planet like a layer of glass. Is that the planet's way of running a fever and purging itself of what's occurring? It is definitely a problem. And climate engineering, in the attempt to hide what's happening, is further fueling the problem from every conceivable direction. Climate engineering is pounding the nails into our collective coffins. We have to deal with this, Mel. Look at the stated purpose of what's occurring in our skies: solar radiation management, stratospheric aerosol injection, cloud albedo enhancement, all names for the same thing, spraying light scattering particles into the atmosphere to block some of the sun's incoming thermal energy. And anybody that's not clinically blind should be able to see this going on. How much material does it take to blot out the entire skyline? And we have so-called meteorologists calling this mostly sunny or filtered sunshine, and they know this a week in advance. How can they possibly know in a week in advance that these operations are going to be conducted and we're going to have, quote, filtered sunlight, unless they're reading a script and they're lying their backsides off, Mel, pretending this isn't going on to protect their paychecks and pensions? And that's absolutely not okay. How are they not criminal accomplices to the climate engineering cover-up? They are. They are. They need to be dealt with as such in regard to being held legally and morally accountable. Why wouldn't an outraged population do so? So the bottom line with these proposals from the so-called climate science community, they tell us, first they propose exactly what we see. We need to put jets in the sky and spray toxic particles. It'll blot out the sky, make it dirty white, disrupt the hydrological cycle, destroy the ozone layer. But that's not really what we're seeing, they tell us. It would look just like that, but I mean, at what point does it become patently absurd? And what other proposals do we have from the so-called climate science community to slow down the thermal runaway event that we have right now? You have to listen to this to believe it. So some of the proposals are, let's cover the polar regions with tarps. Really? We're going to cover Antarctica and the Arctic with tarps? I mean, are these people laughing it up behind closed doors? Other proposals. Let's put Brazil-sized balloons in the atmosphere to block the sun. What? I mean, consider that. Or another proposal. Put 10 million wind-powered water pumps. This is from the so-called climate science community, okay? 10 million wind-powered water pumps in the Arctic to pump deep sea cold water to the surface to try to refreeze the ice, which is imploding on the polar regions. For those that don't understand this, again, it's not about Al Gore, environmental groups, all of them criminal hypocrites. It's about reality and climate engineering making it worse. But they propose 10 million wind-powered water pumps. How much carbon fuel would it take to build those? When you pump the cold water up, you allow warm water to hit the seafloor, which thaws and releases more methane, which is completely counterproductive to what you're trying to accomplish. I mean, it's like a class of morons coming up with the most ridiculous, quote, solutions imaginable that, and in the meantime, pay no attention to the climate engineering elephant in the sky. Here's where, again, the equation becomes complex. Are they trying to thin the herd? Yes. Was COVID a part of that? Yes. Was climate intervention operations a part of even COVID? Yes. It appears from all available data, when we have 85 countries infected in 3 days, that's indicative of an airborne dispersion.
Right.
We know that polymer fibers and graphene are part of the mix. It's in our precipitation tests. Both those elements used militarily for biological warfare to carry a pathogen from the clouds to the ground. Why would we think they're not doing this when they're trying so desperately to thin the herds?
Right.
When they talk about preserving 30% of anything, that's like saying, well, we're going to save 30% of the boat from sinking. Really? How exactly do you do that? When the boat sinks, the entire boat sinks, period. And about the damage done, far too many that are not yet willing to acknowledge the damage is real and it is profoundly advanced at this point. We've lost 80 to 90% of Earth's insect populations, terrestrial and aquatic. And again, there's many sources. We're not denying that. But when you have a source in the sky that is ubiquitously contaminating everything with toxic particles, bioavailable particles, that affects all life forms. And we know aluminum, this is a primary element in climate engineering patents. It's toxic to all life forms, period. Mel, you see that how many trees tip over every time the wind blows now? Because their root balls are dying back, just like the crowns are dying back, because this toxic metal, aluminum most specifically, affects root systems, kills soil microbiome. So, none of that's addressed by, quote, official sources. And in regard to the current trajectory, and this is a very difficult pill to swallow, if we stay on this course, none of us will be here much longer. And people can't digest that if it took us 200 years to get to this point, certainly will take another 200 years to get to a worse point, or maybe twice as bad. That is not the equation we face. This is like the fuse to a stick of dynamite that burns along at a specific pace. When it hits the critical moment, kaboom. And that's the moment we're at right now. We have about 50 feedback loops in full swing, methane being one. As the heating occurs, methane releases, migrates to the surface of the ocean or out of the tundra into the atmosphere. More heating, more methane release, more climate engineering, because that's their method of approaching this, like the pharmaceutical cure. If you're having more symptoms from the pharmaceutical, take a whole bunch more drugs with more symptoms. That's their approach, and they're using it as a weapon. I want to make that clear. They're targeting ag regions systematically, knocking out food supplies.
Right.
But as you couple all this together, you get an unimaginably exponential equation. And I mean timelines like, based on current trajectories, it would be mathematically unlikely, even without a nuclear exchange, for many, if any, to make the end of this decade. I want to make that clear, not centuries. Statistically, if the insects can't survive, we've lost 80 to 90% now today, climate engineering destroying the ozone layer. Let's look at that one factor alone. That one factor alone is an extremely near-term existential threat. Climate engineering, the largest single source of damage. Mel, think about it. Is it more logical to think that ozone-destroying particles being dispersed from aircraft around the globe is the bigger source of destruction than hairspray cans?
Right, exactly. That's what I was just thinking. Oh my!
Think about that.
Yeah.
I mean, people need to wake up and use their sense of reason. So we are on the cusp of functional ozone layer collapse right now. Nothing grows in Northern California except with massive soil augmentation and shading. They're shading citrus trees in California. Since when does a citrus tree need shade? And they're not disclosing the UV radiation. So again, for people that think that somehow things are going to magically keep chugging along if we just elect the right puppet into the White House, not going to happen. And that this one threat, and I'm ignoring the rest for the moment, this one threat alone holds our near-term existence in the balance. No food, and the ozone layer is done. No crop, anything, no food, game over, Mad Max, all of us like Haiti. We are in the cusp of this type of scenario right now. So we're trying to wake people up to the fact that we need to focus on priorities. If our head's on fire, we need to ignore our stub toe and our skin knee. We need to put our head out. We need to plug the biggest hole in the bottom of the boat, or all other causes and concerns become moot. And what's happening in our skies is that biggest hole. Well, first, it's not an exact process. We're talking about unimaginable amounts of energy contained in a cyclone, in a hurricane. And many people online don't do enough research, and they start regurgitating what they heard, and they're not sure how it connects, but they disseminate it anyway, and that's problematic because credibility is important. HAARP is an ionosphere heater. It's a different type of weapon of mass destruction than the ground-based NEXRAD transmission network. So those are two different animals. So HAARP, ionosphere heaters, and HAARP is only one of perhaps as many as 100 around the globe. There's a massive one in Antarctica as well. And that can manipulate atmospheric pressure zones, which in turn can steer upper level wind currents. From ground-based transmitters like the NEXRAD network, that has a repelling effect on the air mass in front of it, and they can push the storms in that manner. And again, that's indisputable. I encourage your listeners to search geoengineeringwatch.org hurricanes. We captured this process with Hurricane Harvey, Hurricane Ian, Maria, Michael. It's absolutely indisputable. So, and then the spawning of the storms, which many people online are claiming that, and you can't really claim that. The oceans are superheating. So nature is capable of spawning the storms. But that being said, are the climate engineers capable of creating conditions conducive to those storms? Yes, they can. If they can manipulate atmospheric pressure zones and atmospheric wind currents, they can cause shear and diminish the storm, or create outflow and convection, which augments the storm. So they can do both. But if we stand on credible data, we'll move this fight forward. And that's what is so essential. And the power structure has very successfully, Mel, driven a wedge into populations by creating one demographic that denies there's any other source of damage to the planet except climate engineering. And that's not true, okay? We've obviously been very bad stewards of this planet, period. The other side is trained that if they hear anybody if they mention geoengineering or climate engineering, or especially chemtrails, ignore everything they say, because that demographic denies the other sources of damage. So you create the division, exactly what they want. And we need to remedy that. We need to build bridges and not burn them. And again, that mantra of, okay, yes, we recognize there's been damage done to the planet as far as the academic left, which are the hardest to reach of all, to acknowledge, yes, we've damaged the planet, but how can you possibly discuss anything about the climate without addressing this intentional intervention of climate engineering? You can't have a legitimate discussion about climate anything without addressing this. And that is our point. So let's fight about the rest later, but we have to stop this. It's weather warfare. Let's call it what it is. It's weather warfare. And about the COP conferences, which you mentioned, Mel, and I'll stop after this. The COP conferences are smoke and mirrors. Nobody intends to change business as usual. Those conferences are about forcing countries to either actively or passively participate in the climate engineering insanity. And what happens when they don't? One more example. Mexico last year, Hurricane Otis. For those that haven't seen what happened in Acapulco last year, take a look at the flyover post-storm. It looks like a post-apocalyptic movie. Acapulco's done. It's never coming back. So Mexico pushed back against climate engineering, and it also pushed back against what's happening in the Middle East, that the Western narrative and the demonization of genocide, actually ignoring the genocide and ignoring other facts relating to it. Mexico pushed back against both those, and suddenly what happens? Acapulco, an insignificant tropical depression with no warnings, went to the strongest Cat 5 hurricane to ever hit that part of the world in less than 24 hours. And the meteorologists were completely speechless. They had no idea how this could happen. And that's what weather warfare can do. And if they wanted to do that with Helene and Milton, they would have, because those that didn't look or notice, the sensationalized impacts, the landfall of both those storms was nowhere near what we were told.
Right, exactly.
But we were also not told what was coming for North Carolina. Zero warning, because they had other agendas and they didn't want to highlight that. So again, we need to look through all of these smoke and mirrors and deception, because weather warfare is being carried out. Well, first, important sources are helping us to bring this to light. I was actually scheduled to interview again with Robert Kennedy last week, but his mother died. So I'll hope that happens again. I have done one extensive interview with Robert. My gratitude to him for that. He's certainly aware of the issue, and now willing to more and more speak out. You might have seen he did a couple tweets, excuse me, and that helped a lot. In regard to what we can do, again, this is where a very difficult truth must be faced. The current paradigm cannot be maintained, and climate engineering a big part of that, but not the only part. And we have a population that wants a particular type of ending, or they don't want to listen. And again, I would compare that to an example I've used many times: standing in the freeway at rush hour, and if you don't want to face reality, you just turn your back to traffic. Right. That's not going to serve you very well. We need to face traffic. We need to face the oncoming train. Much of the damage done to the planet already cannot be undone. Climate engineering being a massive part of that can't be undone in any time frame that matters. And no one wants to hear that. Does that mean why try? No, it doesn't mean that. It means that we try to salvage what we can of this miraculous planet so that some might make it through what's coming. And know this, and this is the big variable, Mel, as the population begins to wake up to the fact, and they are, that the party's over in its current form. It's over. And once they are nearing a point of potential panic, the power structure will play very big cards. And that could certainly involve the dispersion of a pathogen much worse than COVID, Marburg or Ebola, a hemorrhagic fever. Who knows what they're capable of? And they're openly discussing, Mel, in circles of Washington, the benefit, if you can imagine this, the benefit of a limited nuclear exchange. There isn't. You're correct. So they're discussing what they see as a benefit to put enough particulate matter into the skies to slow down the warming. Well, how brilliant is that? The second there's any nuclear exchange, what little is left of the ozone layer will be stripped away by the ionizing radiation. Game over. We're done. And you know that all the people in Washington, how many of them have ever been to war? How many?
Exactly.
None. So the bottom line is, and again, people can't see who's controlling the media at this point. I mean, how obvious can it be when we hear only one side of the narrative and not the other, and people know nothing of the history? And it's profound that many of the people that are actually very tenaciously against climate engineering are waving their pom-poms in full support of other power structure crimes and carnage and conflict in other regions. And that's profound to me. It's the same core of cancerous power behind all of it. So,
I know.
Well, certainly, if we look at anything from Hurricane Helene and the Piedmont lithium mine there that was roadblocked from the owners, and consider also even places like Gaza that has large hydrocarbon deposits under it, I wonder where that fits in the equation. How many people consider these factors? They don't. They simply feed off matrix media disinformation because they're being told good, they're bad. And climate engineering is a conspiracy. And I mean, we need to stop feeding from the matrix media trough of total disinformation. In regard to the current paradigm of extractive economies that cannot continue. That's what nobody wants to hear. But if anybody hasn't seen the film Gasland, I would recommend watching Gasland. It's shocking, and there's Gasland 2 now, I believe.
Oh wow!
Dark Waters, another good one about the disaster capitalists that you mentioned. And those disaster capitalists, Mel, are like pirates filling their pockets with loot on the deck of a sinking ship. And they will sink with it. And we're not dealing with sanity. People need to understand that. Mel, how many times have you heard people say, well, they can't be climate engineering because they wouldn't do this to themselves? They already have. It is. That's exactly what it is. In fact, here in the Central Valley of California, which was once the breadbasket for the country, they're tearing out orchards with excavators because the trees are dead.
Right.
The UV is frying them. The soils are sterilized. And this is where, again, no one wants to hear that this paradigm was never sustainable. And that is not to side with the Gores and the AOCs and Those people are the epitome of criminal hypocrisy. And at geoengineeringwatch.org, our attorneys have spoken to, in the past, they've spoken to all the attorneys from the major environmental groups, WWF, Sierra Club, Greenpeace, all of them. None of them were willing to address the climate engineering issue because they didn't want to lose their 501c3 nonprofit. That is criminal. That's absolutely criminal. So again, not only have we depleted the soils of all their nutrients that are necessary to continue to grow food, we've sterilized those soils with toxic rain. The rain is toxic, by the way, and that's not speculation on my part or hypothesis or theory. We have peer-reviewed science study now to prove there's not an uncontaminated drop of rain on planet Earth anywhere, and not just any toxins, PFAS, forever chemicals, part of which are climate engineering operations, but also from countless other sources of pollution where there's about, I want to say 150 something thousand different chemicals now, a couple thousand more every year. And we're spewing them out like there's no tomorrow, and there won't be on the current course. And even these studies didn't even address the climate engineering elements, just like no air quality testing, none of them even look for climate engineering elements, highly toxic to all life forms. So I stated earlier, like aluminum. Right. California water quality testing stopped testing for aluminum in 2002. Why?
Unbelievable.
And so again, you can't find what you're not looking for. I've been in high-level EPA meetings in Sacramento arranged by congressional reps. Top EPA officials told to my face and sheepish voices that the system is rigged. We're told to look for combustion particulates only, and the rest of the sample goes straight out the window. The whole system is rigged, and all the particle testing, Mel, looks for generally PM10, occasionally PM2.5. So we're talking about nanoparticles that no system looks for, let alone discloses. So we have this mountain of contamination that's completely off the radar that we suck up with every breath. Is it any wonder? And you see the pharmaceutical commercials that make it look like it's normal to have all these breathing problems. And when I went to high school, I knew one or two kids that had some kind of a problem out of thousands and thousands. And now it's every other person. So
yeah, it's terrible.
Again, yeah, if we can't breathe without sucking up this material, that's a fight for life. Yes, a screening of the Dimming documentary. Invite the community, a screening of the Dimming, and explain to people that don't ever underestimate your own power in this equation to throw a pebble in the pond and have the ripples go all the way across it. Every one of us, as I tried to outline at the end of the Dimming, the editor did with statements I'd made on the air in previous years, that any one of us could be the final pebble to trigger the landslide of awakening. In regard to Tennessee Representative Monty Fritz deserves all the credit there. Monty's an exceptional human being. I communicate with him often, and he is the one that made that happen. He went about it in exactly the right way. He pared that legislation down to the inarguable nuts and bolts. Do you want to be sprayed like a rat? And the bottom line is, he's a great rep. There's other really exceptional congressmen that I'm communicating with from the Carolinas, Connecticut, the number of other states following. And even though that was a symbolic legislation because you can't enforce what the DOD considers, quote, national security.
Right.
But it put it on the radar, and the power structure pushed back hard. And just like, Mel, you remember the deluge that just hit Dubai a couple months back? Yeah. Okay, so 2 years worth of rain in 6 hours. Is it just a coincidence that happened days after Dubai said it was going to ditch the dollar? Was that a shot across their bow? How about Turkey? When Turkey told NATO to take a leap, 5 days later, swarms of earthquakes hit Turkey. And that's another subject, but the same weapons of mass destruction. An ionosphere heater signal, that's millions of watts of power, microwave power that can be bounced off the atmosphere and back down into seismically sensitive zones. And that science is not disputed. When you beam that kind of power into a seismically sensitive zone, you cause heating, and something has to give. Is it a coincidence that MIT, let's go back to the Japanese quake in 2011. Right. MIT, your listeners can look this up. I encourage them to do so. If they search MIT, atmospheric heating, Japanese earthquake, we had MIT acknowledging what they called extremely anomalous atmospheric heating directly above the epicenter for 3 days. They can't explain it. So, and to add, General Burt Stubblebine, the highest ranking U.S. military officer to speak out about what really happened on 9/11. He was a personal friend. And General Stubblebine told me that his Pentagon contacts told him Japan was starting to ally with its regional partners at that time, and they wanted to send a shot across their bow. And so they did. They didn't intend Fukushima to happen, but when you trigger a 9.0 quake, bad things happen. So we're dealing with an out-of-control cancer Mel, and we'll all pay the price if we don't deal with it, starting with what's happening in our skies. On your last statement, and I would agree with you, so we need to not enter that arena, the climate denier arena. Don't enter that arena. Don't deny that there's damage done to the planet, because it is done, but direct the focus to what we all should agree on. Again, no legitimate discussion about climate anything from any perspective without addressing this first and foremost. So keep the focus there and share credible data from a credible source. Don't just regurgitate something you heard somewhere on some podcast that was somebody talking about something they don't know anything about. Right. Credible data from a credible source. Stick to the nuts and bolts, because the verifiable data is far more than alarming enough. We don't need to venture off into the weeds. We are being treated like lab test animals. The atmosphere has become a war zone with toxic elements. If that doesn't alarm somebody, then walk on to somebody else who is halfway awake.
Right.
And at Geoengineering Watch, we do on the left side of our page, we offer printed color, extremely effective materials for less than our cost, Mel, less than our cost of producing and shipping. My only goal is to get them into circulation. And those are excellent keys to the door, because a picture's worth 1,000 words. When people can look at the satellite images and the federal gag order, why would our nation's weathermen be gagged? National Weather Service and NOAA, if they weren't hiding something massive, that picture of the gag orders there. So if you have a screening with some materials and give people something to actually work as a key to the door, instead of running out in the street, pointing at the sky and ranting. We're playing chess. We need to play effectively and efficiently, and that's how you do it. Thank you for your voice.